What's going on, y'all? It's your boy Cool Colas here, and you are now tuning into a new video on my channel. Y'all voted on it, and today I'm giving it to you. I'm going to be talking about who the real villain is of the movie Boyz N Da Hood. So let's get into it. I recently went back and rewatched the movie Boyz N Da Hood, and this movie is actually a lot better than I thought it was. And that's big for me because I've been going back and watching a lot of these old school black movies that I used to watch a lot back in the day, and most of them just aren't really all that great. They don't have a good storyline, the message is even worse, and overall I can just tell that we only liked it and watched it because that's all there was for us to actually enjoy. But I went back and I watched this and I realized they were really spitting some real shit from the very beginning. I mean, you had the scene where Trey was in school and you had the white teacher who was talking about pilgrims and all this other shit. And then at some point, Trey, he was disinterested. So she called him up to do a lecture of his own. And he was talking about how all black people are from Africa, or how all people are from Africa. And then, you had the little boy in class and he was sitting there, talking about how he wasn't from Africa, he was from LA. And to a certain extent, they both actually made a very good point there. So I was like, wow. So they actually, brought up a very interesting topic. Also, I noticed there was a lot of symbolism in this movie. So for example, you had it where Doughboy would commonly drink 40s. And you had it where Ricky was eating sweets a lot. So this could possibly be translated into this idea that they would use these things as coping mechanisms to deal with their circumstances, that being them being in the hood. So sweets is often known for a lot of men who have a sweet tooth as a relaxer, especially if you're anxious or even possibly depressed. And obviously Ricky, just like everybody else in the hood, would have been going through a lot. And then alcohol is also like this number that is like a depressant that basically brings you down and kind of takes you out of having to deal with your reality so that you're in a more relaxed and calm mood. So we can kind of see how that's also used to a certain extent. And then you also have where at the very end, the Ferris character, who was supposed to be the villain, was putting a whole bunch of ketchup on his fries. And then his friend had said something about, why you putting all that ketchup on your fries? There's a strong possibility that that image was just foreshadowing this idea that bloodshed and death was near, specifically for them as a group, because shortly after that, we all know that Doughboy took all of them out, with Ferris being the last person that he actually took out. You also had that Sambo police officer, who we're going to get into a little bit later. And then you also had the Furious character, who probably was not only my favorite character in this movie, but was possibly one of my favorite characters in black movies, generally speaking. I mean, this man was masculine, he was assertive, he was challenging, and he had a strong code of ethics. And you really don't see a character that's portrayed like this in a lot of black movies today, because generally this character, if they are portrayed, is usually seen as a villain, somebody who made a good point or maybe said some things that sounded good, but overall they seem to be morally compromised. So they like to do that type of thing. But with this character, he was everything that I just said, but he actually was presented as a heroic, good guy type of character. So the thing I also liked about Furious is that he didn't take no bullshit from folks. He was wise. He was able to, for the most part, create a healthy co-parenting situation for his kid. And also, too, he doesn't eat swine. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because it's funny, because I always whenever I refer to pork, I always refer to it as swine. Like, oh no, I don't do no swine when I talk to people. And I feel like I probably got that from Furious, because even when people are like, oh yeah, do you eat pork chops, you eat ribs? No, I don't mess with the swine. Just keep that swine away from me. I'm not a Muslim or anything like that. I just don't eat the swine. And it's not good for you. Let's just be real. I also liked Furious because he wanted to be there for his son. He wanted to help him and teach him how to become a man. He was carrying a weapon so he could protect his home. He was good at discernment. He was well educated, especially on issues such as white supremacy and gentrification. And he also knew the 3 rules of being a well-equipped leader as a man. Number 1, look people in the eye when you speak to them. Number 2, stealing isn't necessary. And number 3, don't respect anyone who does not respect you. If I'm being honest with you all, the real villain of this movie is very simple to identify, and that's the white supremacist. As I said before, the true villain is always whoever causes the majority of the issues in the movie. Given the central theme around this movie is about showcasing what goes on in the hood, the overall message is that the hood is bad and the goal should be to leave it before you end up dead. The white supremacist is the reason, however, that these hoods even exist in the first place. They deplete the resources that black people have in these neighborhoods and then blame these same black people in these hoods for acting on survival mode while they are there. That's how we get these movies in the first place. As Furious also stated in the movie, we don't own any mass transportation. We don't own any planes. We don't own anything where we can actually ship these different things into these communities. So there's no way that we would have been able to create this environment that is in the hood on our own. In other words, the white supremacist brought all of these different harmful entities to these neighborhoods, such as drugstores, drugs themselves, guns, weapons, and other harmful traps that just keep black people who live in these communities into a means of survival mode. And also it decreases the property values as well too. They then gentrify these places, buy them up, redo them, and resell them for a much higher price in order to move and keep all the black folks out the neighborhood, leading to them being randomly dispersed elsewhere. Eventually, a mass message gets put out there that blacks need to leave these hoods rather than build them up. They seem to encourage black folks to dream of promised lands and symbolic ideologies as solutions to these problems rather than actually, again, fixing them up. So they'll kind of put on these different messages, especially this was true in this movie, that the idea is that we are from Africa, so it's a pan-Africanist, we all are from Africa type of thing, and that's where we need to go back to. And also they put out there that Trey and his girlfriend both are going to HBCUs in Atlanta because they present Atlanta as this promised land for black people, and HBCUs are also the end-all be-all solution for black people in education. But we all know that there are a lot of pitfalls that are much beyond the way that they're presenting these different types of things. The idea of even going to college in the first place ignores that education is dominated by white supremacy. Y'all also have to understand that the dominant society operates in a system of half-truths, and then blacks who have been brainwashed by other movie messaging will parrot those messages. They often tell the truth and give the real solution to a systematic problem in a movie or show, but then they'll override that truth by presenting a resolution at the end of that same movie or show that is different than the correct solution that they've already presented. Furious throughout this movie made a big speech about how blacks should buy up the houses in the hood, keep it black with tons of black-owned businesses in the area, and also that standardized tests are biased, and the only piece of the test that isn't is the math portion, which is obviously the truth. Yet it's presented that Trey leaving the hood was the practical solution because the hood was so bad, but you don't see anything about him building up businesses, keeping the neighborhood black and safe from gentrification. He basically was out of Cali and he was into ATL. This was presented as a happy ending that was adverse to Furious's advice from the get-go. And one thing you need to understand is that any trauma sauce movie that involves police brutality, thug drug culture, or poverty porn is bound to have its villain be the white supremacist, but nobody will ever actually make it clear that the white supremacist is the cause of the problems to begin with. Which is why we need to talk about who the secondary villain is of the movie. For the sakes of making this whole video interesting, we need to focus on shifting from who the movie villain is that caused Ricky's death to who the real villain is that caused Ricky's death. And to be clear, before you all just start trying to speculate and trying to figure out whoever it is, it's not the gunman in the backseat who shot him with a rifle. It's not Ferris. It's not Officer You Think You Tough. It's not none of these people, y'all. The real villain is Miss Baker. That's right. The mother of Ricky and Doughboy is the villain, the real villain of this movie. Now let's back up a bit before we go real deep into this topic, y'all. One thing that's interesting to me about this movie is the characters and their family dynamics are portrayed as comparisons to each other. And it's done with a lot of symbolic messaging within. And it's an excellent case study for the dynamic in the way a young black man is raised and how he turns out as a result of his upbringing. In the case of Trey, he may not have had a happily married two-parent household, but he did have a strong, masculine black father and a mother who we're going to say right now was agreeable enough. Most likely, Furious was a young guy who was probably in the streets and got busy with the local hood honey, that being Trey's mom, and that resulted in Trey. But then Furious wisened up and opened his third eye and became more pro-black as time went on and as time progressed. This proves that black fatherhood is crucial, maybe even the most crucial part of taking care of and raising a child, especially a black boy. Because look at how he was able to get Trey together when he went to live with him. He quickly became responsible and understood the important rules of being a man as a result of Furious teaching him. And at some point, of course, they did attempt to water him down a bit because, you know, they had a scene where Furious was meeting with Trey's mother. And they were discussing how he was going to go live with his girlfriend once he was finished with high school. And there was a conversation between Furious and the mother about their differences in opinion on him doing that. That being that the mother wanted Trey to kind of consider what he was going to do before he made that decision. And Furious basically saying, hey, you have to make your own mistakes, make your own decisions, and then learn things as you go along. At some point, they attempted to water down Furious's impact on Trey in developing him as a young man. And what they did was they added or emphasized, I guess, this pseudo-feminist gimmick onto the mother. And they showed you traces of it in the very beginning of the movie because you had this thing where she was meeting with the teacher because the teacher didn't like Trey's attitude, and he also had like a temper. He was smart. She said that he was smart, but he had a temper. And she started flaunting around that, you know, she had a master's degree because she was a little bit put off and defensive about the things that the teacher was actually saying to her. So she decided to get in feminist mode there to a certain extent because, again, a lot of women who are in this mode start flaunting around their hundreds and thousands of degrees that nobody gives a shit about. And then at some point, you know, if we fast forward to the conversation that she had with Furious about Trey, she got assertive. And when there was an argument over, you know, this topic of who Trey was going to live with, at some point she was telling him that he needed to sit down and telling him that he's cute, like she's the one dominating and hunting him, and again dampening the impact of him being a father, because she basically said something to the effect of, I know that you did what a lot of men wouldn't do. You really stepped up. But just so you know, what you are doing is something that women have done since the beginning of whatever time. That's right. Here we go again with this. I'm the mama and the daddy propaganda shit that sisters back in the day, of course, used to toss around like it was a baseball. The problem is that they were trying to make it like the problem is that they were trying to put Trey's mother in a role where she was somewhat masculine and aggressive, as if to use that as a way to basically say what Furious did really wasn't about shit. It was just some regular stuff, when he really was the father that a lot of young black men, or black boys in this case, don't get to experience. So it actually was a big deal, and his role in Trey's life actually was quite crucial to Trey's success and how he turned out. And you could actually see that when you compare that to what actually happened with Ricky and Doughboy. The honest truth is that it wasn't that serious for them to do this, but they only put that in there because of the fact that they were trying to create a certain messaging when it came to her character and the whole, again, feminist agenda there. That's why they threw that onto her, because all Furious was trying to say is that Trey is not a baby anymore and he can make his own decisions, which actually was a valid point. But again, they wanted to undercut that. But I won't go too hard on Trey's mother, because for what it's worth, she was cooperative enough to let Trey be raised by this man so he indeed could become a functional man himself. In the case of Ricky and Doughboy, however, it's like night and day when comparing that to Trey's upbringing and what happened with him. Miss Baker had two sons, Ricky and Doughboy, and she was doing it all by herself. There was no man in the picture, but I guess we could say in the case of Miss Baker, there were no men in the picture, because Doughboy and Ricky had two different fathers. It'd be one thing if there was just one father and he was the father of both of Miss Baker's sons and he just basically ran off on her. Then there could be a debatable argument made that it could be one of their faults or the other, and we could discuss that then. But Miss Baker was rocking with two different sons by two different babies' daddies. So what that proved is that she was a total bust down. She was the hood rat back in the day who always had her legs open for every brother to crawl up in her. Hell, why do you think she'd always talk about how Furious would never come over to play cards with them anymore? It's because he grew up with them, most likely, and he knew what she was about. He read the room and he saw that he didn't need that type of energy in his life. And he saw the way that she moved and the way that she behaved. And he probably also saw too that ain't too much changed when she got older. The second issue is that Miss Baker was verbally, physically, and emotionally abusive. And not only that, she also was a master manipulator. She was emotionally and verbally abusive specifically to Doughboy throughout his childhood. She even was shown telling him that he was just like his daddy and that he wasn't shit and he was never gonna be shit when he was just a boy. It goes back to something that I read from the late and great pro-black psychiatrist, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, who spoke about this in her book, The ISIS Papers. This is what we would call the no good nigga daddy trope. Frances Cress Welsing in her book stated this, and I quote, "A female alienated from males is hard-pressed to reinforce patterns of conduct in a male child that remind her of unhappiness and pain. She is more inclined to say, 'There you go, looking and acting like that no good nigga father of yours.'" And this statement that Frances Cress Welsing made was proceeding the idea that white supremacy was aimed to separate the black man and black woman by any means. Being in the hood with a lack of resources and other looming issues made this an easy feat. Anyway, we can talk about the nuances of abuse and therapy now in 2025, but back then when you watched a movie, there were only two reactions to this type of thing. The first is that people would take this as a joke or a piece of comedy and think this was funny. And the second is that is the worst, in my opinion, which is that they would turn a blind eye and they would justify it by saying she's a woman and a mother who had to make hard choices, or she did the best that she can do to justify her actions. Because again, we knew that this woman was dead ass wrong for the shit that she was doing. Hell, let's be real, even talking about this type of thing today is seen as taboo. And folks are more upset at me analyzing the overlooked past than browbeating Doughboy for being a product of his environment. There's an unwritten rule, by the way, in the black community that there is somewhat of a hierarchy when it comes to respect. At the top of that hierarchy are old black women and grandmothers. Below them are black mothers. Below them are black women and girls, regardless of whatever their age is. Below them are old black men. Below them are black fathers. And at the very bottom are black men and black boys. And this skewed pyramid of phony respect often overrides truth and accountability, replacing it with dysfunction and hypocrisy. Doughboy went on to become nothing more than a common hood Negro and thug as a result of his upbringing. He became abrasive, violent, vengeful, emotional, prideful. Doughboy as a personality represents everything that we in the black community back in the day used to think was a sign of masculinity. But in actuality, it's the very opposite. It's a form of femininity because of the level of emotionality that comes from his actual behavior. Going back to Doughboy though, something can be learned from this. For one, this exemplifies that the son who is not loved and encouraged even from childhood will grow to have his confidence and self-worth shattered, especially if it is done at the hands of his mother, the first woman he will ever attempt to love or fall in love with. Doughboy was being shot up with venom and manifestations that he would be worthless since his childhood. And Trey, however, was given a decent balance of love and warmth as well as confidence. As an adult, Doughboy was still given verbal and emotional abuse, but now you can add physical abuse to the list of things that he experienced at the hands of his mother. When Ricky was murdered, she blamed him and attempted to assault him to the point where Trey had to pull her off of Doughboy. Ricky, however, didn't get the same treatment. He was treated with gentleness, love, femininity, and to what one would call fair mothering. Ricky was coddled and loved on, and as a result, he was on his way to having a successful football career, at least in college. But we need to touch on a few things with that as well, too. Although Ricky wasn't abused emotionally, verbally, or physically, he was definitely manipulated just like Doughboy was. I'd even argue that Miss Baker did not love neither Doughboy or Ricky, despite showing all the signs that she definitely loved Ricky, or at least loved him more than Doughboy. I believe she was just using him. It was almost like they were two puppets being controlled at her convenience and even used against each other. But both these children of hers were used as case studies for the worst case scenarios of how black men turn out when they are raised by a toxic single mother. Either they go out there and knock everyone over in the streets, or they become a willing mama's boy with nothing else to show for beyond their purpose in serving their mother. I mean, let's be real for a second. Although Ricky was treated with this golden child syndrome type of thing and had seemed to be have the brightest future, he was arguably not even as smart as Doughboy intellectually or streetwise. And also, he was terrible at reading the room. Think about it. He was only good at football, and they foreshadowed this many times. Ricky was a certified meathead. He was that college jock that you see who just had bricks for brains, and you knew that he was only good at football, but there wasn't too much up here. He couldn't even articulate himself when he was talking to Furious about his job. Remember, he was like, "So what do you do? Do you help people get money for their homes or what?" Which Furious replied, It's not or what, it's what I do, Rick." He had a baby and a baby mama even before going to college. A lot of people might try to make the parallel that Ricky was intelligent because both him and Trey were set up to go to college. But even if you look at their circumstances, from the whole sex and child birth thing, like being a dad, or being a young dad, that is, you had it where Ricky, of course, had a kid with his baby mama, and Trey was cautious almost to a fault when it came to him having sex with a woman, let alone impregnating her. And that's why he had the issues that he had with Nia Long's character. When he spoke to the dude who came to his house, who was possibly going to help him get a scholarship to play ball, he had no idea what he wanted to do. That's why he said, maybe business, or I could do something with computers. It was like he was pondering and speculating at that moment, but it was almost as if he had never really pondered or speculated before that moment that he was asked that question. And then even when he was taking that exam, he was just twiddling his fingers and his head was in the cloud and he wasn't concentrated or focused or anything like that. And then Trey had to kind of like give him a signal while they were taking the test, telling him, you got to lock back in, fool. Like, what is you doing? So you could just see different signs that he was just not the brightest bulb in the drawer. And if we're being quite honest, when Ricky's mother got that test back, the results that is, he just barely passed that exam. He needed a 700 to pass and he got a 710. Also too, wasn't his GPA like 2.3? That's not the sign of a smart dude, or at least on paper it's not the sign of a smart dude, that is. And all these other pieces that I just named back up why I'm saying that he wasn't really all that intelligent. Hell, he even had the genius idea of them splitting up, him and Trey, when they were trying to run away from the shooters who were out to get them. I mean, Trey was like, look, we shouldn't split up at this point. And Ricky was like, no, we should. I got this. I'm telling you. And then guess what? He ended up being graded like Swiss cheese. Miss Baker exposed Ricky to what I would call the black promised land trope. This is when a parent, the old niggas at that, invest in their children, but through major speculation and luck, so that their success in life would entail that they would take the money and the resources that they gain and bring it back home to the family and save them and take care of them. Again, the problem is they were too damn lazy to create a plan, so they gambled on the possibility that their kid would be a success in something such as sports. In this case, encouraging her son to become an athletic prodigy would have been her meal ticket out the hood, had he been successful, that is. Ricky was babied on top of that, so he'd have a guaranteed loyalty to his mother on top of her, again, encouraging him to be a football star. Selectively nurturing Ricky while abusing Doughboy showed she knew full well what she was doing, and she wasn't doing the best that she could. It's just that no one wanted to call her out on her bullshit. Doughboy, on the other hand, read a lot of different books when he was locked up. He was street smart to a certain extent. He was able to read the room, such as when Ricky died, and he kept trying to tell the women to give him the baby because he didn't need to see his father shot up and dead. He also understood why Trey wanted to get out of the car when they were riding together to get those dudes who shot Ricky. The problem at the end of the day was that Doughboy's confidence was low, and he didn't care about his life because he was also aware that he didn't have a mother who actually cared or wanted to invest in him, and he articulated that to Trey. The point here is both kids were manipulated to become what they became. And unfortunately, Ricky meeting his demise was almost painted as karma, if that's something that you believe in for the sakes of this movie, because of Miss Baker maliciously plotting to create him as a meal ticket for getting out the hood, or for her getting out the hood. Miss Baker is not just the villain of this movie. She is also not a real mother. Miss Baker is not just the real villain of this movie. She is also not a real mother. She's just a 304 who birthed some kids. And that's it. As I said before, whenever we analyze these movies, the real villain is the person who causes the most problems, or at least what the movie frames as the central problem. Had it not been for Miss Baker's poor parenting, she would not have lost both her sons due to thug business. The movie just wanted you to focus on the unnecessary violence in the hood to take away from the failed agenda of the shea butter mama. Alright y'all, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say today. If you liked it, I would love if you liked the video, subscribe, shared, and hit the bell icon so you get notifications for whenever I come out with new content on this channel. Other than that, I'll be talking to y'all later. Peace.